Yes, hello. So this is research done in relation to a project called A Car-Free Year. And I'm also happy to have the co-authors of the paper here, Mia and Kristi, there, yeah. What we wanted to explore in the project was alternatives to this. And as you probably know, cities or many cities have been designed for cars for many years, which is now causing some problems. And we wanted to look at how design and ICT could support alternatives to owning a car, or how to make it easier for people who do not own a car. And of course, not everyone owns cars. In Sweden, about 60% of all commute trips are done by car, which can be compared to 90% in the US. So in Sweden and in Stockholm, there will be many families who do not own cars. But we wanted to work with families who are in contexts where the car is a norm. And there are many such places still, and cars are still causing problems in cities, also in Stockholm in Sweden, where we did the research. So this is the basic setup of the project. We worked with 3 families with children during 1 year when they replaced their cars with different types of light electric vehicles. And these are the families in the project. And you can also see their light electric vehicles. So the family on the top, they have, or during the year, they rented an electric bike. And the little car that you see is not a car, it's a 4-wheeled motorcycle. And then there is an electric scooter, and the families in the bottom, they have electric box bikes. And we wanted to pick families that were different so that we would see different challenges of not owning a car. So these families, they have children of different ages. They live in different parts of Stockholm, in different types of housing. And they also previously used their cars for quite different things. And then apart from using these light electric vehicles, the families also, they walked, they used regular bikes, and they used public transport. And the fact that there is good public transport and these families, they lived rather close to public transport in Stockholm, was an important part of the project. And we followed these families during the year. We had monthly interviews with them when we came to their homes. And for the interviews, we used different types of trigger materials. And here are examples. It's a trip diary to the left, where the families, they filled in the trips that they did and how they felt about them the week that before we came for the interviews. And then to the right, there is a visualization of trips. So the families, they had an app on their phones that tracked their movements, and then we could look at it together and discuss the different trips they had made and with what kind of mode of transport and what was different from before when they had a car. So this was all used to spark discussions during the interviews. And then we analyzed all this material from the interviews and looked particularly at different positive and negative experiences that the families had during this year, and the new practices that formed when they did not have a car anymore. And it was a lot of practices that were affected by removing the car. And something that the families did more when they didn't have the car anymore was to buy stuff online. So they bought groceries online, but they also bought other appliances they needed for the home. And then it was delivered to their homes as a service provided by the company. All the families also biked more. Or particularly for the family, one family with young kids, this box bike could almost replace the car in a way that the family could easily put the children in the box and then move from point A to point B whenever they wanted, just like with a car. Another aspect of, or another new practice was that the children, they traveled more alone by public transport. Before, the parents usually drove them to their after-school activities, but now they traveled by public transport to a great extent, or they went with other families within sports teams. So maybe another family took the child of the family who didn't have a car anymore to the match or the practice. And It required a lot of planning, particularly in the beginning of the car-free year, for the families to adapt to the new practices or find the new practices. So it was both like daily planning, how to get to work, how to get to school, how to get to activities, and how to have time to eat in between. But also planning for more rare occasions. So how do you go skiing with a family of 5 when you don't have a car? How do you get to the north of Sweden? How do you get to the slopes from the place where you're living when you don't have a car? And ICT was a great part of many of these practices in terms of helping them with the planning. So they used travel planning tools to find out the best routes or to find out the nicest routes. And they used online tools for online shopping, of course. And there was also a tool for ride sharing in sports teams that one of the families, in one of the families, they used this ride sharing tools where the families could coordinate transport to matches. So these are kind of practical aspects of not having a car, but the life without a car also had more emotional sides. So the families knew that they would be different in these contexts. They would break norms. And we have an example already before the project started when we posted the call for participants on the project Facebook page. We got this reaction, or many similar reactions, but this is an example. Of course, we can manage 1 year without a car. We can also manage 1 year without a job, without an apartment, without a phone, without TV, without meeting family and friends. The question is why one would make it so hard on purpose. So this was also reactions that the families faced from, well, among their colleagues or friends. They were wondering, why do you add this extra hassle to your life? You already have 3 kids. Why also choose to have 3 kids but not have a car? But for the families, it wasn't only hassle. Yes, there were practical challenges that they had to solve, but there were also benefits of not having a car anymore. And one thing that the families mentioned was that there were new outdoor experiences. They were biking more, and the kids always had to be dressed for being outdoors because it's really cold in a box bike when it's not summer in Sweden. So almost all of the year it's cold going by bike, and you have to be dressed properly. But that also means that you can just stop on the road and play if there's a nice playground or go on a spontaneous activity. The parents also appreciated that they got more exercise from more biking. But it wasn't only exercise, it also meant that they were outdoors more. They got fresh air, they got a bit of sunlight and daylight. And especially in Sweden during the winter months, there isn't much daylight. So if you can catch a little bit of it on the way to work, then that's great. And they also appreciated being able to go take more beautiful paths to work compared to when you're in a car in the middle of all other cars. The bike roads, they often go a little bit off the main road and maybe some nice trees around. And it was a bit of a nature experience on the way to work. And then another positive experience that they realized along the way was that the children got more comfortable in the city. The children, when they moved more alone, or when they went by bike together with the parents, then they got to see more of the city. So they made the city their own, and the parents appreciated that, and they also felt more safe letting the children go by themselves. So out of all these and much, much more, we have looked at some opportunities for ICT. And in many cases, it's not opportunities for ICT alone, but in combination with other activities or interventions. And one thing we think could be done is to support these odd kind of vehicles that could be alternatives to the car. The families expressed that they often felt very odd when they were using the box bikes or this little motorcycle. And sometimes in good ways, they got positive reactions from people around them, but sometimes it wasn't only positive. And with the box bike, sometimes the parents felt like they didn't belong on the bike road because they were too big, but they also didn't really belong among the cars. And there are also different unique qualities of these vehicles that might not come across. So an electric bike has many benefits that a regular bike doesn't have. And this is something the travel planning tools, for example, could better take into account. And we also think it's important to make it easier to try alternatives. So the families in our project, they got to do it through a research project. But if more families, or to make this accessible to more families, other actors have to be involved. It can't only be researchers. And one actor we think could be important is employers. So employers could provide perhaps these kind of vehicles as employee benefits, and then add elements of spreading knowledge about how to use them. So it's not obvious how you go biking safely in Sweden when it's snowy and icy and cold outside, but the families, through different online communities and also through a bike service company that we worked with, they collected knowledge and they shared knowledge. And we think employers could be a hub for such communities, both online and in real-life meetings. Then a second opportunity is related to transporting stuff away. So the parents, they found it really, really easy to get things delivered home. That's something that's very much encouraged by people selling, or the companies selling products online. And it feels rather cheap to get something delivered to your place. But when you have bulky waste, when you have renovated at home, when you have a lot of stuff that you need to transport away, then it's not as easy. And there are some services, one example in Sweden, of coordinating transport of stuff. And it could potentially be used for coordinating transport to recycling stations as well. But we think it's important that actors that are also very closely connected to recycling are involved in this. So perhaps the city of Stockholm, in this case, should provide such a service to coordinate transport, which could be used by companies or people professionally transporting goods, but also then by families who do not own cars to coordinate transports. Then we think ICT could be used to facilitate helping. So sometimes when you don't have a car, you need help. The case here that the families talked a lot about was going to sports activities, taking the children to sports activities. And it's not that easy in a context where all the other families have a car to be the only family always asking for a ride. So the tool that I talked about that one of the teams used, it made it a little bit easier to be the one asking for a ride, because the tool worked in a way that the families signed up, yes, I'm coming to this activity, and I have 2 free seats in my car. So then the family without car immediately knew who offered rides. But at the same time as this kind of was hiding the oddness of the families not having a car, it also made the car the one mode of transport to sports activities. It reinforced the car norm in this case. So in the long term, it meant that the family without a car could never help with rides in sports teams. And we think this could be adjusted, so you could coordinate rides in different ways. You could coordinate rides with public transport. You could coordinate rides with bikes just as well. And then the fourth opportunity is to think about optimization beyond time. So there's typically a focus on time in travel planners. How fast is it to get from point A to point B? But the families experienced other values that could be better highlighted in such tools that were important for these new transportation practices. And I mentioned before, health and exercise was one of these values, or being outdoors in daylight or sunlight. And then taking more scenic route is also something that could be highlighted. By going this way, it might be a little bit longer, but you'll be in nature on the way to work. And then also possibilities of getting to know the city better, of extending your knowledge of the city. And from this specific case of sustainable transportation practices, we have identified a few design sensitivities that we think could be interesting also for other fields within sustainable HCI. And the first one is to be aware of the tension or the potential tension between the odd and the norm, and how you could, if you're not careful, you can reinforce what's odd and what's normal instead of making what the maybe now odd transportation practice more widespread. Then secondly, we want to, as many others also in Sustainable HCI has pointed out, it's important to work with actors beyond the individual. And we could see a few cases where it's not necessarily obvious who the actors are who influence, in this case, transportation practices or other sustainable practices. So we have the case of employers who could provide employee benefits that support sustainable transportation, but it's not obvious that employers have that influence. And in the same way, so leaders in sports teams, well, their role is really to manage the team to make things work, but they could also influence transportation practices. And then finally, we think alternative ways of optimizing could be useful also in other cases. And I'm thinking particularly related to the sharing economy, because that's often focused on conventional optimization in terms of like optimizing resource use. But by optimizing the use of resources instead of questioning the use of resources, we might prevent more radical types of change. And that's our conclusions. Thank you very much.
So I guess one thing, thanks for the great talk, and I think this is a really interesting project in the sort of the scale at which people have gone without, which is something that often in terms of sort of sustainable HCI, we want to introduce new things, and I think this is really interesting for that reason. I wonder, you know, that you've kind of said this is about challenging the car norm, and in many ways the sort of 40-60% means that there's quite a lot of people that aren't actually part of that car norm. And I wonder, I mean, it might be speculation, but did you see that there are patterns that already exist in people, how people use public transport that were just re-emerging with this group of families?
Sorry, what kind of, if there were other types of people who behaved in certain or did certain things that now these people adopted?
Yeah, so I guess there's, you know, there's maybe in Sweden at least, I think you mentioned there's 40% of people that don't have this kind of car, and there's a lot of kind of strategies that they might have for these kind of situations. And I wonder whether or not you saw that kind of, those being spread either from these families, so kind of whether or not, I know you mentioned that some of their friends were kind of saying, well, why would you do this? Did it start to spread to other people? Did it become more normative for others?
Well, we could see some examples of where the families maybe inspired other people to start or to buy a box bike, for example, or to start biking to work. So yes, in that sense, yes. And I should also clarify that the 60% in Sweden was 60% of people taking the car to work. They might still own a car and use it for driving their kids to sports practice. But for the commute trips, that was the ratio.
I was just wondering, how many of the families went back to owning a car afterwards?
So we kept the car for the time of the project, and during the project, 2 of the families sold their car. And one of these families, in the end of the project or during the second half of the project, they were talking about, oh, maybe we should buy a hybrid car. It's hard not having a car. The teenage kids don't want to go on trips with us anymore. But in the end, they didn't buy a car. A few months after the project, when we talked to them, they had joined the carpool, but they didn't buy a car. And then the third family, they got their car back, and they really wanted to use it at their summer house to fix something with their boat. But they felt kind of happy with the vehicle, so they bought the box bikes that they rented during the project, and they said that they will continue to use them and maybe sell the car later after they had fixed the boat issue.
Okay.
Hi, a quick question and a comment as well. So my question is about, so cars are a prestige thing, at least in the UK as well, so people buy really expensive cars, like ridiculously expensive cars to show off, and there's this community showing off things. Did people, was that an issue in the study, that people felt as if they were not showing off their family position by not using a big expensive car?
So I think what they were showing off was different values. So in this case, maybe environmental concern or responsibility in other ways. But, well, then not through a car, but other types of vehicles. And since we only talked to 3 families, we didn't really get a sense of how important in different contexts the different types of cars are, or how important it is as a status symbol.
Yeah. And the comment was so I'm from Scotland in the UK, and the OpenStreetMaps initiative for open cycle maps has got an app which does allow you to route by other things, which is really interesting. So it's particularly the aggressiveness of roads is the term they use. So which is sort of interesting that there has been rollouts of alternative planning maps.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thanks.
You're looking at people that changed from having a car to not having a car. There are several people in your research group that don't have a car at all. And I was just wondering if the practices that they developed over a year started to look like the people that have never had a car. And is there something about the learning of how to do it that can be supported?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. And since we didn't look at people who never had a car, but we know people who never had a car, so maybe there is some sort of comparison to make, it's hard to say, yes, it was definitely the same after 1 year. But we could see that they talked about it as, okay, now this is the new normal for us. And we could see that they adjusted things to work without a car. So my guess would be that people who never have a car adjust their life in similar ways to work without the car.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.